Good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday, June 28th, 2023 at 1600 hours. This is the budget workshop meeting. City Clerk, we call the roll, please.
Mayor Rostick,
Present.
Vice Mayor Kerr,
Here.
Commissioner Taglerini, Commissioner McGeehan,
Here.
Commissioner Brooks. Here. All are here except for Commissioner Taglerini.
Thank you so much. Now it's time for any public comment for any items that are not on the agenda. If any would like to come forward at this time and speak, we welcome that. Okay. Let's move on to discussion items. 2023 budget workshop number 3.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. I'm Robin Gomez, the City Manager for the City of Madeira Beach, and today we will be discussing our proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2024. This is our 3rd workshop for the budget for next year. But just one item before we begin discussing next year's budget, we're going to take you to in your packet to page 9. I'll have Mr. Laughlin review an amendment to our current year's budget. So beginning on page 9 in your packet, fiscal year 2023 proposed budget amendment number 2. And the page begins by Fund Department, Local Option Sales Tax Fund. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Laughlin.
Great, thank you, Robin. So that's the section, yep, that starts. So what we did is just a comparison of current year-to-date budget, or excuse me, current year-to-date actual to annual amended budget for FY 2023, and evaluated if at the department level there were any potential over expenditures that we wanted to address right away and bring to your attention. So the level of budgetary authority by the city is at the department level. So what does that mean? Each entity can have a certain level of budgetary authority. It can be at the fund level, meaning maybe there's a fund that has multiple departments, and each certain departments can overspend on their budget, but as long as you don't exceed total expenditures and other uses in that fund, then no amendment is necessary. Others might be very prescriptive, and it's at the line item level, meaning at a particular fund in a department in a specific account, like maintenance, street maintenance or operating supplies. You can't overexpend at that line item level. That's very restrictive. For the City of Madeira Beach, that's at the department level. So a department can overspend on a line item. A department can overspend even on a category like personal services, operating or capital expenditures. But what a department cannot do is overspend on its entire budget or in its within its entire department. So in total, we've got 16, in total, we have 27 departments across the city. So in the budget versus actual expenditures page, that's where we go through, we list the fund name and the department name, what the original budget was, the amended, and then compare that to actual through mid-June 2023. And so we want to try to be somewhere in the 50, 60, 70%, but anything over that might be a little alarming. So we did identify one that result that was an over expenditure, and I'll explain that, and then 2 that are starting to get a little close that we wanted to propose an amendment to you for. And we also did an analysis on the revenue side as well, just so you can see by fund and department where revenues are at actual to budget to actual. So let's focus on the expenses now and then address questions, and we can look at the revenues as well after that. So in all, we have 3 proposed budget amendments, and the general fund for recreation, which is at 73%, but there's one particular line item that's really driving that past that 60, 70%, which is where we want to be. And that's at the promotions and public relations line. And then the second is with the local option sales tax fund, specifically the fire department. And that was based on a one-time emergency purchase of a 2023 Polaris to replace the 2014 Polaris, which was already brought to you previously. And then the third is in the parking fund in the parking management department, where we have it's called the bank service charges account line, but that's transaction processing fees from all the parking vendors, which is actually a good thing because then that demonstrates that there's a lot of parking fee transactions that are occurring. So we obviously have the revenue to support that budget increase. So those are the three. There was one that's mildly concerning in information technology. We'll keep our eye on that, but the vast majority of expenses in the information technology department are payments to the outsourced IT provider Network Resources. So we had $200,000 budgeted there for the year, and we're at $178,921 spent through mid-June 2023. So I just want to keep you abreast of all that, give you all that information at a somewhat summarized level. And then in that process, that drove what we felt was a need to propose a budget amendment now in those three areas. So then that takes us to that proposed amendment number 2, one being the local option sales tax fund for fire EMS. So we have the purpose laid out for you all. And in that one, that's the recent service discovered the mechanical condition of that current special rescue 25 was poor, deemed unsafe to operate. And so it's a vital part of the MBFD's response to emergencies. So that purchase puts us over budget. So we would do an amendment for that. And then we mentioned on the parking management side, increasing that transaction fee line from the current budget amount, $135,000 up to $185,000. And we've got plenty of parking revenue to offset that. And then lastly, on the recreation side, increasing that promotions and public relations from 100 to 150,000. And those are the costs associated with the various events managed and run by the city staff, those costs borne by the city. And again, we've got that special event fees that can offset those expenses as well. So that's an increase of $50,000. So those are the three amendments we're proposing. Overall, looks good. On no major over expenditures that we're seeing, we're pretty nice in line. And then those that are not, we've got, in my view, valid reasoning for. So those are the three amendments we're proposing that unless you have objections, we can put that on as a resolution for next month's meeting. Any questions on that? Excellent. If not, there's also a budget versus actual on the revenue side as well. And I think we're looking pretty good on that. We show revenues for each of the funds and respective departments. And there's, again, a few where we have that I thought merited some explanations. So we have 3 explanations for unusual looking variances. So we have those explained in that table. One on the Johns Pass Village, that's a dredging project, 1.5 million plus awarded, but we've only spent 30,000. So that's why there's a very sharp difference between amended budget and actual. And then in the recreation, we did have impact fees that were collected, and currently we're reporting those impact fees in the general fund. We didn't budget for that in 2023 because impact fees were so new to the city. So we didn't know what to expect, didn't budget for it. So I have no budget revenues, no budget expenses, but actual impact fees, cultural recreation, we have been collecting and recording in the recreation department within the general fund. So that's explains why our actual is over budget. And just to preface that, in 2024, and as a recommendation from our auditor from the FY 2022 audit, we're going to move all those impact fees to their own fund. So we'll have an impact fee fund that's going to source those collections for culture and recreation, transportation, and public safety, as well as any expenditures that are eligible for impact fee consideration that we want to expend against those revenues. So we'll have that now in its own fund, budgeted in 2024, And before their fiscal year end for 2023, we'll also create that fund. So for our fiscal year 2023 year end reporting, we'll have that fund separate, which will be new for the city, as impact fees are new for the city. And then the last one, stormwater fund. This was just about a $1.5 million budgeted transfer from the general fund. We just haven't recorded it yet. So that's just a part of our accounting process that we'll do. But that's why you see that variance there. But that will obviously change as we make that transfer. And so that covers pretty much everything on current information for 2023, but I'll take any questions if you got them.
I think it's great to put the impact fees in its own special fund. Don't they need to be spent on specific items, expenses from the city?
Yep, absolutely. So
And
Florida
then-
statute requires, places restrictions on those funds for the additional impact associated with whatever their purpose is.
And within
transportation
a
equipment.
specific amount of time, that from the time they're collected, I believe.
I think it's, I was going to say 7 years. Yeah. So we've got some time on that, but yes.
I did want to backtrack just for a second. The IT run rate, you say that is running a little fast. Do we have any idea why? Are we doing more events that we need IT, or is it we spending more capital on the IT?
There's some of it is capital. I know we've had to replace at least one server, I think maybe 2 servers that have been replaced that we use. That was their recommendation due to age. We've replaced, it's mostly equipment driven. We just added some additional laptops as well, converting some of the desktops to laptops. But we can get into a lot more detail and provide that.
I just
yeah.
wanted to learn from it for next year, for the.
Right, and we will bring you back for next year for the budget. Hopefully, we'll know within the next,
Thought I turned that off.
within the next few weeks. Friday is the due date for the RFQ for our IT services. So we will know, I'll probably give you an update late next week as to what we received, and then we'll review it. And then we may bring some of those firms before you to interview type process or presentation, but you'd be able to ask questions before we make any recommendation or an award that would likely begin October the 1st.
Great.
So that may impact the budget is what the reason I was bringing it up. Hopefully it lowers it, but hard to say at this point.
Perfect. Thank you.
If no other questions on the FY 2023 budget versus actual, Robin, we can go on the next item. And I'll make sure we put on the next regular meeting on the resolution on that agenda for those 3 budget amendments.
Thank you, Andrew. And now, Mayor and Commissioners, as we transition to the workshop to look at our fiscal 24 budget. Lots of information in your packet. We have the staff and finance staff has compiled from each of the departments, each of the areas, what our total revenues by fund and then by departments, and then the total expenditures by funds and by departments. Please, at any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. This is meant to be interactive. We're not just to listen to myself or Andrew. The department heads are here and or their representatives if you have any specific questions. But just wanted to begin, and I'm sort of skipping around a little bit. I'm on the, tell you exactly, page number 15 in the packet, page 15. Just kind of listing our total revenue. And of course, as you're aware, we are required by Florida statutes and our city charter to have a balanced budget. So our revenues, the expected amount of money that we will receive in fiscal year 24, which begins October 1, must be equal to our expenditures. We cannot spend more money than we are expecting to receive, unlike the federal government. So we're proposing that we will be, our revenue for next year and our expenditures will be 43,463,762. Again, that's as of right now, what we are proposing for the following year. And the slide up on the screen on page 15 kind of breaks it down by fund. But as you can see in that page, the majority is obviously the general fund accounts for the 50% of our total budget. As we provided at the last budget workshop, the discussion, a presentation and discussion on capital projects. The capital projects are kind of spread out, and actually I'll jump to the expenditure slide, kind of spread out over multiple departments, multiple areas as we presented. That's why when we go to the expenditure page, which is page number 17, you can see that the expenditures are listed by fund, but that includes all the capital. They are spread out across multiple funds from the general to stormwater, Archibald, on down through sanitation and building. So just to give you a brief explanation on how that looks. I want to then go back up to the top of your packet and begin a little bit of the discussion as to our millage rate and a little bit of the history on the city's millage rate, which we did provide to you a couple of workshops ago. But we are proposing this preliminary budget. We are proposing that we keep the same 2.75 millage rate. Up on the screen, which is page 3 in the packet, lists the ad valorem analysis as through the best data that we have this week or last week, really. We did receive the valuation, the tax roll, which provides the total valuation for all parcels, properties within our city. But this analysis begins with if our millage rate remained the same, if the millage rate experienced a decrease by 1/4 mil or by 1/2 mil. And that on the screen and in page 3 of your packet would list what the actual property tax or ad valorem revenue would be at each of those 3 millage rates. And then the increase or decrease over the current year's budget. So if we retain or at future meeting, the commission chooses to adopt the same millage rate, we would see an increase in the real property tax or the ad valorem revenue of $673,420. If you were to choose a lower millage rate, 1/4 mil, our revenue would increase by $187,903. And if we lowered the millage rate by 1/2 mil, then we would bring in just a little bit less than $300,000 in revenue in fiscal year 24. So just to explain essentially the impact of whether we keep the same millage rate or lower it by either 1/4 mil or 1/2 mil. And if any further reductions, which we're not directly recommending, but certainly certainly a discussion that we can have, of course, then the impact would be a little bit more. In other words, we would receive less revenue than the current year. When we bring you back in July next month, we hope to have the rollback rate, which is the millage rate based on the valuation or the final valuation by the appraiser. The rollback rate is the actual millage rate that would generate the same amount of revenue next year as in the current year. So it's likely somewhere below 2.75, but we'll know that exactly, I guess, in the next few weeks. And
Yeah, it should be early July. Yep.
early July is when we receive that from the appraiser. And of course, we will provide that to you because we will have a meeting to adopt the millage rate in July. And then continuing on that page, if we did proceed with a reduction in the millage rate, there's an example on this page of what that would translate to for a property valued for tax purposes at approximately $700,000. You can see the reduction would be, and I'm just skipping to the third column, that if we lowered the millage rate by $0.5 mil, then a property with that valuation amount of 700,000 would see a reduction in their tax rate to the city of Madeira Beach from just the 2.75 mils, a reduction of $350 for the year. So approximately a little under $30 a month would be the reduction if we lowered the millage rate by $0.5 mil, 0.5 of a mil. If it was only $0.25 mil, the reduction would be, again, for a property valued for tax purposes at 700,000 would be $175 for the year. And again, keep in mind that the 2.75 mils represents approximately 17% of your total tax rate. The total millage rate last year was just a little bit under 17. We are one of 8 different taxing authorities. Of course, there's the general fund for the Pinellas County government. There's the 911 and EMS millage rate. There's the school board. The school board is divided into 2, local and a state rate. And then the smaller taxing authorities such as Southwest Florida Water Management District, Pinellas Planning Council, Pinellas Suncoast Transit, et cetera. The bottom of the page that we're on page 3 gives a little bit of the history of our millage rate and the ad valorem taxes that the city collected. You can see, yes, we have had quite an increase in the tax revenue, and mainly, partially due to the increase in the millage rate over the years. There have been essentially 3 or 2 increases to get us to the current millage rate. But the valuation, the property valuations are what have caused the lion's share of the significant increase in property tax revenue. I kind of got mixed up my train of thought where to go, but just to show you that obviously we're collecting a significantly larger number of revenue that we have before. Keep in mind that every year, just like any business, just like any household, obviously as inflation is a part of our daily life, we have to be mindful, obviously, of increases in the cost of goods and services. So just as everybody else's increases, so do our costs, particularly in retaining and the best workforce that we currently have, and providing salary increases, healthcare costs increases, and again, just the general cost of goods and services. But just wanted to give you that historical component. On the next couple of pages are samples again of the changes from over the last 5 years of the total taxes levied on a residential property, showing essentially if you go from one year to the next, you can observe the changes in the millage rates. And I know at least one or possibly 2 of you have recently inquired as to, well, what I've been paying in property taxes has decreased, or the increase was fairly nominal. And that is a result of a few taxing authorities, such as the county general fund, making changes in their millage rate, specifically lowering their millage rates by small amounts. But when you have multiple taxing authorities lowering their millage rate, it just leads to an overall reduction in your total tax bill. So that's been happening in the last couple of years as the economy has improved. And so revenue, property tax revenues have been increasing due to the increase in values. But as an example, from 2021 to 2022, for the property listed, the assessed value increased by the max, the 3%. So although the assessed value increased due to a reduction in a couple of the millage rates, the total property taxes the last column, taxes levied decreased. Even though the value increased by 3%. And again, as I stated, that increase every year is capped at 3% for homesteaded properties. Non-homesteaded properties are capped at 10% from year to year. I think that was adopted a few years ago. I don't remember when, but the Save Our Homes cap has been around for quite some time, and it does fluctuate from year to year. It's either the max is 3%, but the county uses the consumer price index to set the valuation increase from one year to the next. So in the last 5 or 6 years, only last year was the first time that the max was applied. Prior years, it was kind of hovered between 1.5 up to 2.4%. The valuation increases for homesteaded properties. So just something to also keep in mind. Yeah, go ahead.
Just one question. Do we have a number of how many properties are homesteaded versus non-homesteaded in the city?
We've had number of homes not directly, and I don't know if the property appraiser actually, they can provide that, and we will be asking for that data, but they're updating. They haven't actually all of that, the values as well as what's homesteaded or not. The homestead, you must submit an application by January of each year. So there are homes that, typically every year that are going from homesteaded to non to homesteaded. So we will request and obtain that data so that it provides a little bit. But we know that, a couple of factors as our population has decreased, and we experienced a 12% decrease in our year-round population from 2010 to 2020. Part of that is properties that were converted into rentals. We know that the number of our rentals has increased. And that's a trend that's likely to continue. That's almost not just a US trend, but it seems to be even almost a global trend in folks renting out their properties for visitors, or in some parts for students. So we know that will continue as properties then lose their homestead status. They are reevaluated. So there's typically a higher value placed on the properties, again, because they lose that homestead protection. So they are subject to a higher increase from year to year. And that is part of the reason why our tax roll has increased, along with just the cost of real estate booming in the last couple of years. We are at 14. The preliminary tax roll shows an increase of 14.5%. I believe the third highest in the county out of the 24 municipalities. That's on one of the pages. I know there's a lot of data on that page, but I believe that's page 8 of your packet lists all the cities and the preliminary tax roll. And we increased from last year to this year. Our total taxable value increased from just under 1.8 billion to just over, so almost 2,050,000,000. So 2,050,000,000, excuse me. So again, a 14.5% increase. So, and most of the county is seeing similar or close to that number of increases. The lowest increase was actually Safety Harbor at 9.48%. And Seminole was the only other city that had a change in their total taxable value under 10%. All the other cities were above 10%. So it's just a trend that we've seen the last couple of years, and we will likely see this into next year as well.
If I might, I knew this was coming up, so I took a look at my personal taxes for homestead. In 2019, I paid more property tax in that year than I have for the past 3 years. The city's millage rate hasn't changed. It's been 2.75. So I want us to all, you can take that exercise yourself and confirm it for yourself. But the city's income has increased steadily as property values have increased. But at whose expense? Not at the homestead residents' expense. I'm sure I'm typical of everyone that's homesteaded within the city. We have a lot of projects in the budget that we're going to be discussing which ones are finally make the cut, I guess. We're looking at changing, it's over $200,000 to change the pension program, if that gets approved, which I believe it will. There's lots of projects we need to fund, and as long as the county is continuing to lower, the final millage rate continues to drop, I think it's a benefit for the homestead residents to keep the 2.75 as a constant, but I just put that out there.
I would agree with Vice Mayor Kerr. A couple things that I think we should also keep in mind is when we're thinking about, and the discussion has been put out there to lower the millage, when you're thinking about the services that the city provides, we only get 17% roughly of the ad valorem tax that is collected. And where that 17% goes is a lot. And as the properties are turning over from homestead to non-homesteaded and being reevaluated in pricing, or just someone's coming in and purchasing a home at a much higher price than what it was appraised at with someone who'd lived in it for 20, 30 years. And our taxes are going up, so are the expenses of the city. We have more tourists coming into town. We have more things going on. We're spending more money cleaning the beach. We're spending more money taking care of our roads. I think that is a lot that we should really keep in mind for that. I also think we should keep in mind that I believe it was 2019, we took the loan out for the Crystal Isle project. We still owe money on that. And we have more roadways that are going to be required to be repaired. And if we're not saving for the future, we're going to end right back up where we were in 2019, taking out a loan to repair infrastructure that is required.
So I'm going to move now over to page 19. And I think Andrew can provide the better explanation for the table that's on page 19 regarding essentially how we're funding the budget or the expenses based on fund and where the revenue is coming from and what the expenses are. So again, on page 19. Andrew.
Sure. And before I do that, I know, Mr. Mayor, you had a question on homesteaded properties, and the property appraiser actually has a really cool website, very interactive, and you can set in your filtering criteria. So total number of residential properties in the city of Madeira Beach is 2,983. Of those, 1,135 are homesteaded, or 38%. So there you go. Okay, so this is our budget summary by fund. And again, as your city manager mentioned, all funds present a balanced budget. That doesn't necessarily mean that total revenues equal total expenses. You also have other sources and other uses, some of which might be some existing fund balance that is accumulated from prior years in order to fund a budgeted deficit. And in essence, then make that fund balance. So in this, I know there's a lot of information packed on one page, but you have at the top are your revenues and other inflows. So taxes, permits, fees, special assessments, intergovernmental revenue, charges for services, et cetera. And then you have a line, fund balance, net position, carryover used. And so that's what we need to use in order to balance the fund balance, or to balance the budget, to make revenues and other inflows equal expenditures and other outflows. And then that equals your total sources. And then your total uses are your typical personnel, operating, and capital expenditures, personal services, operating expenditures, capital outlay, debt service, grants and aids, and other uses. And then if you have excess from your total sources minus those expenses, then you would have net fund balance, net position available, in essence, a surplus. And that's what then can carry into future years from a budgetary perspective. So we can see some funds that have that deficit that we're using existing fund balance, and then some of which do have a surplus. And so you can see that at the fund level for each of the funds, governmental and oh, sorry, I had a sneeze, lost it. Thank you. For governmental and proprietary funds. And so, and then again, we go into the details. So then the remainder of the support behind this shows you all the detail at the fund level and the department level for both revenues and expenses. So what makes up those taxes in the general fund for $6,691,884. So we've got all those individual revenue accounts that make up all these revenue balances for the general fund and all the other funds. And then as well as expenses, we show personnel, operating, capital, debt service, et cetera, for each of the departments individually at the line item GL, general ledger account string line item level. So give you all the detail, like it or not. But this is the very summarized view that I really like seeing in one picture. Okay, show me all your inflows to this fund, show me all your outflows, and then where are we different? And do we have a surplus, or do we need to use existing fund balance to help balance this budget? And that's what that picture of the budget summary by character shows you.
Andrew, page 15, the fund balance net position used on the revenue. Could you briefly put a description on where that 12 million
On the grand total?
on that line item, fund balance net position used, 12,273,848.
Because you're at the, you're looking at the total, the summary of revenues by fund,
Right, page
Total.
15.
total revenues and other sources. Okay, yep.
Yeah.
So if you go down to the budget summary by character,
Down on page 19 lists the detail for that 12 million.
yeah. So
That's what Andrew was referencing.
And I see that on the, on the last column, grand total, and the 3,395,000 on the expenditure side. So, I'm not a finance guy, but
Well,
if you
yeah,
take
so-
the total revenue at the 31 million line.
Yep.
100%, and the total expenditures at that same line, it appears that there's almost a $9 million over. The expenses are 9 million over
that's right.
what we're bringing in. Is that accurate?
Yes. So let's look an example. Who's the biggest offender? If you want to call it that, the stormwater fund is comprising about half of that grand total balance. Why? We have unspent debt proceeds from 2019. That's about almost that full 6 million. I think it's about 5.9 million, right? So we made a major debt issuance of 15 million and change, of which we have a decent portion, almost 6 million unspent. And we've got budgeted, and we can go to that stormwater budget specifically. We have budgeted significant capital expenditures. Hence the line for capital outlay in that budget summary by character of $8,350,000, right? And we don't have stormwater fee revenue to offset that. We're not going to go charging residents a stormwater fee that's 13 times what they've been paying. We'll have pitchforks out in front of City Hall. So we issued debt in 2019. That's not revenue in the current year, but that's been accumulating that net position available for expenditure. And that's what we're pulling out of that fund balance net position, those remaining unspent debt proceeds. So yeah, that's a deficit this year, but we have that debt that we've issued that is sitting in cash in that position that is available to fund that deficit and ultimately fund those capital projects.
Okay, so the 50% of that
50% of it is, yeah,
was the stormwater, that was a capital expenditure. The other 50% is, I mean, can you hit some of the just?
Sure. I mean, a good
the-
chunk of that's the Archibald Park Fund, so we can look at, there's some big capital expenditures in the Archibald.
Which
Park
page
fund.
do I go to? Is that summarized in one of these, or is it just, you guys got?
We want to look, if we want to, we can go right down to the detail and look at what those capital expenditures are for Archibald. If you like to do that, why don't we can just go straight to the you want to go straight to the capital detail for Archibald, we can see what those projects are.
That's on
Well-
page 60. If you wanted to look at as he stated, the detail.
No, I
for-
don't want to spend the
Okay.
evening on line item by line item. I just, these are the questions that I don't know the answers to, so I just want to be able to understand it. So, yeah, okay, so you had 4.8 million on the Archibald, is that correct?
Yes,
That was
for
the
capital.
budgeted on the capital improvements there, okay? So that's a big piece.
Right, and you can see
And
a
then-
million for the restrooms at Archibald, 3.5 million for the beach groins. And again, we've been carrying for the beach groins, I believe at least 1 million or 1.1 million in just available funds for that specific project. We did not spend that money last year. We're probably going to spend a little bit this year, but the majority will be next year likely. It'll likely be next year because we're still waiting for permitting from the U.S. Army Corps.
All right,
So that's where the detail of a lot of what Andrew's been referring to, again, referencing is related to the capital. Our total capital budget for next year is over 21 million. And again, a lot of that is being funded by these balances that we've had, as he stated.
okay, and I know we go over this, and I ask the same questions probably every time because I just need to be able to. So, stormwater, Archibald, beach groins, that's probably 75% of it, at 12 million.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the big figure. And today we can afford it. If you look over the 5,
Well,
7
we don't
year-
really have a whole lot of choice. We've already committed or spent or, so
We've already issued that debt to fund that big 8.35 million.
an adjustment to
remaining.
get it off the books.
Yeah.
Or,
But if based on that 5-year projection over time for stormwater, we have some proposed big expenditures in 2025, 2026, 2027. We'll need to look at potentially issuing debt if we want to continue with those projects.
Right.
But for
And that's-
now, these projects that we're looking to finish were already a part of that master plan that was under that.
sure, these are
Seriously.
already approved. These are already spent budgets years ago,
Yeah.
basically. We're just catching up on the accounting side of things.
That's right.
All right. It just reinforces my point. We need that 2.75 to be able to fund the rest of the stormwater.
Yes, operating is not an issue. The city can fund its own operations, but there's a lot of capital projects that have a big price tag that we need future inflows to support.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? No? Good. So continuing down through the packet, again, as I stated, we do go into, there's line items for each of the funds by revenue and then by expense for, again, the entire budget. So if there are any questions, we'll just touch on a few highlights of, or, our general revenue fund. As we've stated, the majority of that revenue, or nearly a little over a third, is from the property taxes, from the ad valorem taxes. But there are multiple other, taxes that we do collect. And we're obviously making sure that we receive every penny that we're lawfully entitled to. But everything from our business taxes to the utility or public service taxes on electric and water, propane, other, the half-cent sales tax portion that we receive, communication services tax. Although it's called a franchise fee, it's like a tax, but a franchise fee on electricity that Duke Energy collects and pays to us. So all of those are, again, within the general fund. We've listed some of the proceeds that we've received, for example, for from the county or through the county for some of the road projects in the general fund. We're also including ARPA funds that we received. I think last year was the last year that we received, but a little over $2 million. And as you just go down the individual revenue amounts or line items, you include charges for certain fees, for example, for a lot of in our recreation programs, after school fees, summer program field rentals, et cetera. We also show in the general fund the revenue for the agreements that we have with the Reddingtons to provide fire rescue services there, and also the EMS portion that the county funds for us to, again, provide some of those rescue services. Also included is the state appropriation that we received last year to dredge John's Pass. That's what the 1.5 million is on the second page of the general fund line item, and that's on page 23. What you do not see in what we're proposing for next year, what you do not see is a transfer from the parking fund to the general fund. The main reason for that is we previously had in our capital project budgeted for to build a parking garage in the general fund. We have now transferred those expenditures to the parking fund, and they are being funded by parking revenue to eventually build that parking garage. From an accounting perspective and the accounting rules, so far we're up to nearly 800,000 in the additional 50 cents parking fee when the increase was approved from $2.50 to $3. But then the parking fund has been doing very well. The parking revenue has been increasing. So we're hoping to, if we were to borrow anything for the garage, it would be very, very little. That essentially most of the revenues would pay for that. There have been comments in the past about parking, the parking revenues were previously funding the general fund. And that's where all the revenues were before. So there's nothing, that's what we're proposing. That's the, for lack of a better term, sort of the proper accounting method. But all of our funds, including the parking fund, do provide a contribution to the general fund. It's identified as administrative services allocation, and it's budgeted for next year at 535,000. But there again, that's what our recommendation is. We would prefer that that's how we proceed, but it's any negative impact to that, not really, but we want to follow the proper accounting rules for enterprise funds, which is what your parking, your marina, et cetera. On the next, and then on the next few slides, as you continue down the packet, we get into the expenditure side, which typically tends to generate some more discussion and questions. We do list by department or by area what the actual expenditures were for for fiscal 22. You have the budget for the current year and then what we're projecting in expenditures for the current year. And the last column is the budget for next year. So there are some have some increases related to I'll start with fire specific a little bit to we're looking to add 3 additional fire, I'm calling them fire medics, but firefighter paramedics, as we have discussed with each of you to comply with one of the NFPA directives that would increase our staffing on at each shift from 4 to 5. So that's a little bit the increase on the fire. If you're curious why there's such a large increase in the city manager budget, that's where I placed, when you get to the detail, a capital project for the honor court at $250,000. Again, as I stated before, we've received already a $25,000 donation from the American Legion. We really don't know the cost of that, but it's likely going to be less than $250,000. We're hoping to have more data for that later this year as to what that will be. But every department shows a 5% salary increase. We just received the rates late last week and then some more updates earlier today. And we're looking at an 11% increase in the premiums. As you think are aware, we do provide a medical health, dental and vision. The dental and vision, I think, at no charge to our employees, but certainly the medical, which is the largest expense, we do provide a no cost premium plan to all employees. Then employees have a choice to buy up into a higher or an enhanced benefit plan. But we do, our budget for the current year was 12,500.
12,500, yep.
And we're obviously we're going to experience at least an 11% increase in that rate. And then the other decision that we've discussed up here as well is whether we extend the benefit of paying a portion of the premium for those employees who carry dependents on their medical, dental, vision benefits. So if because we just got the data, we're estimating if the decision was made to cover 50% of the premium for dependent care, and we would, we're just estimating the number of employees who potentially would utilize that. We're looking at about a 200,000 total increase just in our health coverage for employees. But we'll bring that back to you at the next session with more definitive numbers, since again, we just received those today. And as you continue down the packet, again, we get into the line item for each department or each area, what we're proposing to budget for fiscal 24. And certainly if you have any questions specific to any department, otherwise I can go, we can go through some of them and look at some of the changes. For example, again, back to my office's budget if you go to the detail on page 29, in the city manager's office, you'll see an increase in salaries. That's due to the transfer essentially of two what were part-time positions in the city clerk, in our IT function and in HR to my department. So that the reason for that increase, but of course those two areas then will have a decline in their budget. We may need to make that adjustment in this document for the HR position, because I believe it was oh no, it shows it as not a budget. Okay. So that's an example of the increase in the city manager's budget specifically for salaries. And again, as I stated earlier, there's a 250,000 capital improvement for the honor court in the city manager's budget. Others are some departments where we had, particularly community development, where we had open positions. We had budgeted, but we were, I think, budgeting at the starting, the minimum salary. And now that we're filling positions, we are filling them more at a market level. And so that you see why the salaries in that department are proposed to be higher for next year. But at least community development does offset by some of the revenues that they do. They do manage the processes, for example, for the business tax receipts and other planning and zoning applications and processes. Some departments have changes in professional services, depending on what we're doing. The community development has an increase related to, not an increase, but still a fairly higher than historical number due to the fact that we're going to be looking at the city's master plan, strategic plan, the 2002 report. So we've included some funding, if likely to hire a consultant later on to guide us through that process as well. Also include, I believe, Andrew, we did include the changeover to the FRS in the budget.
We still need to go through each employee and denote that change. We have some maybe on ICMA that will need to flip over to FRS. And so we'll be going through that process in July. So numbers could update for the next budget workshop to account for that change. So those would be the two personnel related changes that we could see from now till the next workshop. As you mentioned, the health insurance increase, independent coverage, and the FRS conversion.
As you continue through some of the other departments, I'm just skipping down to John's Pass Village, for example, on page 36. That's clearly an increase. Mainly, that's where we're placing the money for the dredging. So you can see the revenue for the dredging and then the corresponding expenditure for it. So in case somebody would look and say, why such a large increase in John's Pass Village, where historically we budget in there just the maintenance out at the village and the boardwalk. But this year or for next year, the majority of the revenue and expenditure for the dredging.
And that was 100% funded, wasn't it?
We're hoping that, yes, that's the estimates that we received from the county and from USF, that would be the cost to dredge the area, essentially part of it underneath and then to the east of the bridge over to Treasure Island. We also did receive a slight, about a 7% increase in our contract. I did share that with the commission a few weeks ago. I believe we did preliminarily receive our renewal for fiscal 24. It was about a 7% increase from Pinellas County Sheriffs.
The law enforcement services, the budget for 2024 has increased. Are the personnel are we adding more deputies or sheriffs to the?
It's the same, no, it's the same number. They provide, 24/7, two road deputies. They work 12. There's an A shift and a B shift for each day. There's a sergeant and then a lieutenant. The lieutenant does oversee a little bit of the larger area to include St. Pete Beach, us, the Reddingtons. The sergeant mainly focuses primarily on Madeira Beach, but they do also kind of, do some patrol in the Reddingtons, but they're pretty much housed out of our facility here. And then whenever I've requested 3 times since I've been here, that when they have kind of their sergeants, meeting with the road deputies, kind of their roll call for their shift, that if they're not meeting here, I've requested 3 times that they do that at Johns Pass Park to kind of alleviate a few behavioral issues that we've had out there. But yeah, Commissioner, no increase in staffing, but we are making more requests of services to be utilized here, both a little, to be reactive, but also a little bit proactive to try to defer some issues that we've had in the past. So they've been very, very receptive. Right now, out at Johns Pass Park, we have it's got a fancy name, but it's the surveillance trailer with multiple cameras, and that's recording and keeping an eye out on almost that entire parking lot. And it's worked, because every time it goes out there, it seems whatever issues we have kind of stop, because people realize they're being recorded. And for a better part of the day, there are staff at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office watching those screens. They're not watching them 24 hours a day, but that's what they're doing. We've had even significantly enhanced services by the Marine unit. And at the workshop, we'll hear from Sergeant Blair about what they do. But, we've made multiple requests, and they, very quickly, do that work that we're requesting. So they've been, very, very helpful. We've had the mobile command unit out here, which we do every year for the seafood festival. And we hope not, other services are available, the ones that you hope not, that you don't have to use, such as SWAT or K9, but obviously those are available. Any other heavy equipment that they use, those are available. During at the end of last year, during Hurricane Ian, they provided a lieutenant, essentially, as soon as the emergency declaration was made, 24 hours communication with us. And typically that lieutenant or the lieutenants would call about every other hour, every 2 hours, just to give us updates. And then we would, how things were going out here. So again, we continue, and we're kind of using their services a little bit more, just to make sure that we keep the safest city that we can.
If I might, page 39. Why is it that certain line items in fiscal year 2022 show a significant number, yet 2023 and 24 have nothing? Have they been transferred to a different department or a different line item, or different, like lease revenue, rentals and leases? Between the two, there's almost $400,000, but you don't see anything projected out in future years. Was that moved?
I think the lease revenue was.
So lease revenue, I could bore you to tears, but there was a lease standard called GASB 87 that required, we would record that as just cash in and revenue as we collected it, and we had to account for it differently.
So it's redefined? Is it?
And which line, let me see which line item.
Well, it's,
Yeah. On page 39,
I just use as an example. We
2007.
we have.
lease revenue,
361200.
362007.
Yeah. Another example would be for parking fines. In 2022, we have 173,000, yet in other years, we just don't have.
We moved them
anything.
to the parking fund.
That got moved to the
Okay.
parking fund, yeah.
Well, that's what I assumed, but my question really then is that, can I make that same assumption for any of the others?
But they've been moved to
They've
other.
just been moved to a different area.
Yes, specifically for leases, yes. So we changed our accounting just at year end. It's a year end journal entry in order to comply with accounting standards around the lessor and lessee leases that the city has.
Okay.
So that impacts your actual results, but we don't budget that way because it's just an accounting entry at year end.
That's what I figured. What are we leasing? We have Archibald Park. Is that a lease?
We receive revenue from the
Snack Shack?
structure, from the snack shack, I'm sorry, yes, at Archibald. And then the building, I can never remember. Fantasy Planet building and in the village. It's immediately to kind of to the north of the surface parking lot on Village Boulevard. It's currently a surf style and an ice cream shop. And so we lease that to corporation.
Great.
We have four total, a beach concession,
I'm sorry, I forgot the concession.
12928 Village Boulevard. That's
That's
Fantasy
Fantasy
Planet.
Planet.
And then Snack Shack, and then Crown BU 813828. That's our Crown Castle cell tower lease.
Bell Tower.
Oh, yeah.
The
Oh, that's in
four-
there? I thought that was a separate line item. I thought we had or maybe,
Uh,
maybe it moved.
no, that is a separate line item. Or at least it was.
Yeah.
It's on there as the Bell South Cell Tower line.
But under non-departmental, I believe, right?
Yeah, it should be on that
Yes,
same
it's
page. I
under
think.
non-departmental.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, there it is.
Here it is.
005.
Yes.
And then we have a carryover of 2.6 million, which is, that's in the budget. It's budgeted, but it's not in projected any longer. Maybe is it still projected? We're gonna have a surplus this year?
I think, yes, primarily due to certain expenditures that were, I think, related to certain projects that are next year,
But, yeah.
as we stated.
You have fund balance carryover and use and fund balance carryover available. Those are just budgetary terms. We don't actually book transactions to those. So you'll just see that in budget, not actual.
Great. Is there anything in here that stands out that needs to be addressed in your opinion?
Just really the kind of the items that I mentioned, again, the increase in the budget, and more than half of our budget is related to all the capital projects and all of those, again, that we discussed at a prior workshop, that were all listed at the end of this document, again, and it's showing you for multiple years, but all of that detail of each project is listed. Essentially, the last section, starting on the cover sheet, is on page 59, and then it continues through the end of your packet through page 64. I do want to point out, again, as you continue down, the line item detail is in order, starts with the general fund, and then it goes on to all of our other funds, from Archibald all the way to sanitation, marina, parking, sanitation, stormwater, et cetera. And again, it's just showing you the detail of per line item revenues and expenditures. Sanitation, as I think you're aware, there was the rate increase was in December of 21, Megan. December of 21, where there was a 28% increase. So to kind of help the sanitation fund become a little bit more solvent, and where it's doing much better, I think, as was presented during the external audit, that it finally has a little bit of a balance for all of the trash that is collected. We're not looking to make any significant changes, although as we begin to experience some retirements, there may be a position or two that we do not fill going forward due to some of the automation, where we typically had a crew of 3. At some point, we may be down to a crew of 2. We're not there yet, but just something that in the future, and of course, we've discussed our sanitation many times up here, but we will continue, because the one thing I hear from our residents is we've had spectacular trash collection. We want to continue to keep that. It has become quite as I've shared several times and Megan has as well, it's been very difficult to keep. The turnover has just been very, very high and difficult to find people willing to do that type of work, even at, we're starting at $18 an hour. If you have a CDL, it's $19 an hour. Some cities may be going to $20 an hour as a minimum for the same reason, as well as private companies from your Waste Management to Waste Pro, although they're, I think, a little bit behind in terms of the salaries, but and our stormwater as we go forward, as Mr. Laughlin stated, particularly that's where we budget for our road projects. So as we go forward, we're using previous balances to pay for some of those, but into the future, we are looking at obviously alternative funding sources from state appropriations, grants for our road projects. We have received some in the last few years, and we will continue to do the same to offset. But in the future, we may bring forward and we'll have discussions about a possible increase in the stormwater fund. It has not been increased for many years. And we currently are at $10 per what's called an equivalent dwelling unit. So most single family homes pay $10 a month or $20 on your Pinellas County utility bill because the bill is for 2 months. Others, we're kind of in the middle of the county. The county has a tiered structure for their stormwater fee. It's based on the square footage of your house. So which is the impervious part. I'm not so sure if that's the best way for us to proceed, but something that we will likely need to in the future. It's not a gigantic impact just yet, but just worthy. I wanted to mention that for going forward. Really not, our other funds are well, the building fund, as we've discussed, we do have a little bit of a surplus that we do need to begin to spend. Otherwise, we would eventually have to refund some of the permit fees that have been collected. The Marina Fund, really no significant changes other than just a couple of the capital projects that we had discussed. On page 60, I'm sorry, page 56 is our personnel funded positions. And it gives you also a little bit of the history. But as you can see, there is one oversight on the page. The HR, the HR should be at 0 instead of 0.43, although we may have left it at 0.43, I think, because of there are still an area within the city or department. It's just we moved that position into the city manager's office. But the only increases in positions are, as I stated earlier, in the fire department, and then a couple of part-time positions in recreation and parking, or to add another half-time for parking enforcement. I believe, there's a decrease in the building fund for a position that I don't think we're going to fund. Doesn't appear that we're funding next year. So that's why you see a little bit of a decrease in the funded positions in the building fund. But that's, again, we're constantly looking in some of the enterprise funds to make sure that they are properly staffed. And just to remind, if anybody that happens to be listening or will listen later or watch, our enterprise funds, so essentially the building, sanitation, stormwater, marina, parking, those are funded by fees specific to those operations. So they are not funded by your taxes, whether property tax, sales tax, taxes on water, electricity. They are funded specifically by the users of those services. So obviously parking is funded by people who pay to park or who don't pay to park and receive a citation or violation. The marina is by people who fuel their boat, visit the marina shop, lease a slip at our marina, et cetera. So that is funded, and all of their expenditure are paid by all of those revenues building again captures all permitting and all the work necessary to enforce the Florida Building Code and the International Building Code as well. Sanitation, again, just the fees that we charge for the trash collection fund, the sanitation fee, and the stormwater fund. I think I did overspeak. The stormwater fund is funded by other sources specifically for the road projects, because that's where we account for all of our road and street improvements and milling and resurfacing. And so that does come from at least a portion from the general fund. But we're looking at for fiscal 24, 83.56 full-time equivalents, and you can see a little bit of the growth all the way back to 2017. And then there's the subsequent pages 57 through 59 list by department or by area. Excuse me, 57 and 58, the positions by as they are listed in each department and the number of positions that we have in that job description.
Back to the grants for the roadways one, is that, who's tasked for that? Is that our lobbyist that is tasked?
If we're looking for, yes, that is what, although they're not, yes, as part of the state appropriations, or if we were to choose to do any federal lobbying as well. But yes, our lobbyist includes that in our packet every year to any type of funding that we may receive from the legislature. We did not receive any this year. We did receive some last year and the year before. I can't tell you exactly why or what, but those bills that went forward were a little different this year than last year, specific to requests that cities and counties make. We did make a request, and we make an annual request of our state legislative delegation for either a specific project, like we did this year to help fund a public works fire day room building, as well as a road project. And we got a bill for the public works building, but not for the roads. But we're constantly, we meet with our lobbyist. We're actually going to have him give a presentation probably at the August workshop to be what we're already beginning to prepare for next year. But one of the bigger areas that we're looking for is the undergrounding, for example, that our lobbyists can help, as well as the firms that we've discussed in the past. But that's where it is. We can also, there's other grants available through other entities that we research, but pretty much it comes from the state.
I just know we have some big numbers out there in the next couple of years, Bay Point being top of mind. And I don't know what we can do to really go after some grants. If we need to speak with our state representative, she's been so helpful in other grants.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just curious.
Yeah, Bay Point is fiscal year 2026, and we've estimated 7 million.
Just right around the corner.
And then, as I said earlier, the last pages in your packet are again the detail to our multi-year capital improvement plan program.
If I may make a suggestion on some of these, if we could maybe turn them in the landscape mode and make the fonts a little bit bigger. Right now, on the paperwork we've been provided, it's like about a 2-point font. Very difficult to decipher.
Make it a little bigger.
This is landscape, so we definitely made it landscape, but we can try to space out into more pages.
Yeah, that looks a little, the way that it was came out of printer, we'll make it a
No,
little.
there are
picture.
some pages it's not, I can't even see it myself.
That's 2023, and I'm not young by any means, but I like the laptop because you can zoom in, zoom out, make it as big as you need to, as small as, but
I agree. If we bring
Like,
you can see much better on your laptop than you
Yeah,
will
it's-
ever see on that paper.
There you go.
Well, it's landscaped on the
Can't see
PDF
it.
that I'm looking at on my laptop.
But we make it a little bigger. Let's do that. If you have any questions or anything, comment, but that pretty much is what we're looking to. That's our presentation for this workshop. Again, we'll look to begin to provide some of the data that I'd mentioned regarding healthcare and the FRS. Because those are going to be a little bit different than what's in the budget. And ultimately, if we need to make any adjustments, we make from what's presented, we look both at the expenditure side and the revenue. There may be obviously some expenditures that we can lower in certain areas. But we look to do a little bit, to be a little bit more successful in the revenue side and forecasting, that we may receive a little bit more revenue than we did. And so it's difficult, but we're usually, pretty close to try to be as close to probably 90 to 95% accurate on the revenue. You want to, budget conservatively. You don't want to budget $1 million when you're only going to receive 750,000. So we obviously try to be very conservative in that aspect, as
Yeah.
well as on the expenditure side. But
And to that point in the revenues, the Office of EDR, that's the Economic and Demographic Research that the state of Florida puts out around summertime. So June, July estimates for every municipality, certain state revenues like communication services taxes, local option sales tax, state revenue sharing. So initially in this budget, we just project based on historical trend. We also will look at that and then potentially update some of our revenue figures to what they report and make them match.
that's the local government financial information handbook. I think I emailed that to all of you within the last few weeks. It's about a 370-page PDF, and it has everything you wanted to know about most revenues that we receive, including formulas and as Andrew stated, the projections, population projections and revenue projections for your larger state revenues like the sales tax, the communications tax, et cetera.
And one more quick thing, in the stormwater fund, we've budgeted over 5 million of expenditures, capital expenditures for FY 2023. And we're finding due to delays, some of these projects that we thought would be drainage and roadway improvement projects we thought would be ending. Looks like they might not be getting started until 24, as we're finding out. So we are going to push some of those initially budgeted in 23 over to 24 budget. So that 24 budget could increase a bit by some of those unspent funds in the in stormwater for projects that just couldn't get off the ground in 23. So that's the other more significant change you'll see from this version to the next one. And then, of course, as city manager pointed out, we'll get those ad valorem, the property appraiser will initiate the trim process and will provide the official assessed value, just value, assessed taxable value, assessed value, et cetera. And then we'll provide with that rollback rate. And so we'll provide you all that information. So by our July workshop, we can get consensus from you all on where to set the millage rate. Because we would need to, I would need to submit that, finalize that by end of July, very beginning of August, no later.
But the next meeting, we're actually going to be voting on the amendment to adopt amendment number 2.
So that'll be in the regular meeting, mid-July, independent of FY 24 budget considerations. And then in the next budget workshop, we'll talk through and get your consensus on the millage rate.
Great, thank you.
I know it's a lot of data, so appreciate you bearing with us and going through it. And thanks for all the good questions.
I noticed that the Board of Commissioners budget for 2024 is higher, are we getting a raise?
Take a look.
Not at this time, but
You usually run on the basic.
you can,
low end.
can adopt a salary increase, but it would not take effect until the next commission gets seated, I believe, for our charter.
I think we got 5,000 in promotions and public relations budget in 24 that we did not in 23 is the big difference. Otherwise, everything looks pretty much the same.
A little bit more in travel, training.
Yeah,
Oh, a board appreciation dinner, which we have not had in at least
2 years.
2 years.
Because of COVID.
If nothing else, then turn it back to you, Mayor.
Okay. Commissioners, we have no other comments. Then I guess we will adjourn our budget workshop meeting. The time is 5:26 PM.